everything I can to protect America, and I will do everything I can to make sure Donald Trump is not president.
One thing that could help Hillary Clinton to her goal is to win Texas in November. That's not supposed to happen, but a new poll tells a different story. Good morning and thank you for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. A presidential poll released this week surprised a lot of people. The results show Hillary Clinton actually leading Donald Trump in Texas. Take a look. The Washington Post SurveyMonkey poll gives Hillary Clinton a slight lead in the Lone Star State, 46 to 45. To give you a little perspective, this poll is based on randomly sampled surveys of more than 5,000 registered voters in Texas between August 9th and September 1st. In a four-way race, it's still a dead heat. Libertarian Gary Johnson and Green Party candidate Jill Stein grab a combined 14% of the vote, leaving Clinton and Trump each with 40%. So what does that mean? Let's go in depth and take a look at the map for the upcoming year. The Electoral College is based on population, and Texas has 38 Electoral College votes, second only to California's 55. New York and Florida both have 29, and when it comes to other swing states, Pennsylvania has 20, Ohio 18, and Michigan 16. That means Texas counts the same as two of those states. And you need 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. For decades, Texas has been a firmly red state. But as Phil Prazen shows us, with Texas in play, expect to see a bigger focus on the Lone Star State.
In 1996, I was in a congressional race and realized that I was really a Republican and a conservative.
Jennifer Sarver worked for Republican office holders for 20 years and voted that way too.
I plan to vote for Hillary at the top of the ticket and vote R all the way down because I am a Republican. I don't believe that Donald Trump is.
She points out for the first time since 1968, the Dallas Morning News is not endorsing the GOP candidate. Good news for one particular office in Austin, where pictures of the Democratic heyday still hang on the walls.
Speaks to Texas's diverse new majority and them understanding which party is fighting for them.
Texas Democrat Manny Garcia hopes tightening polls bring in more national candidates, volunteers, and money to support their statewide effort.
What we're really focused on is permanent infrastructure.
But Republican strategist Matt Makoviak says Texas is still solidly in Trump's camp.
I don't think the poll's credible, and I'll tell you why.
He says the Washington Post poll was too broad, over too many days, and was online instead of over the phone. Makoviak won't worry until he sees political ads in local media.
If you turn on the 5 o'clock news on KXAN or 6 o'clock news on KXAN, they see a 30-second ad from Hillary. That will be not just a political earthquake, but that'll be a significant development that'll show Hillary thinks Texas is winnable.
Phil Prazen, KXAN News.
In case you're wondering, the last time Texas went for a Democrat was 1976. Voters chose Jimmy Carter for president. And 40 years later, could Texas go for a Democrat again? For perspective, we go to our political roundtable. Joining us is Heather Wilhelm, who writes for Real Clear Politics, and Jay Root from the Texas Tribune. Welcome, guys.
Thanks.
So what do you think about that? The Dallas Morning News endorsing Hillary Clinton. That's big.
It's unusual in a very unusual year. In terms of this poll, I mean, it's an outlier poll, I think, but the issue is not one poll. I mean, we've had other polls that have shown this to be closer than past, recent elections. And, as Donald Trump might say, there's something going on here. I do think, you have people like Jennifer Sarver, Republicans who just can't go with Trump. And then you also have Hispanics who, we've been talking for years about the sleeping giant. And when they feel insulted. A lot of Hispanic voters feel insulted by some of the rhetoric that's coming out, and maybe they're waking up a little.
And we always hear about the Trump effect on these down ballot races. Could it really be disastrous for the GOP for a long time if he is elected?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And, speaking personally as someone who has voted Republican in every election that I could have, I first voted for Bob Dole, and all the way through, I'm not planning on voting for Donald Trump. I'm going to vote down ticket, though, because I think that's extremely important. If Hillary Clinton does become the president, I think for Republicans strategically, it's extremely important to keep a hold on Congress. So I think the question is how many Republicans who are Trump shy are going to understand the strategic value of going in and voting down ballot, and I think that remains to be seen.
Well, and Texas is so heavily redistricted. I mean, there's really only one race in Texas that's seen as competitive, the 23rd congressional district that runs along the border. And the Democrats left an incredible, potentially an incredible opportunity on the table because they didn't field candidates for tons of state house seats, for example, that if there's a sweep, if Donald Trump were to really collapse in Texas, which I'm not predicting, I would say that chances are, I would definitely give him the advantage. I think that it's likely that he'll win. But if he were to really collapse, say something really stupid, which as we know could very well happen, then there's a lot of opportunity that would have gone to waste for Democrats.
I watched the NBC interview with Matt Lauer and the two candidates this past week, and it seemed like a lot of Hillary Clinton's time was talking about her emails and answering questions about that. And of course, Donald Trump was just a lot of talking points and not a lot of specific answers. Are we really going to see something different when we hit the presidential debates in a couple of weeks? What do you think?
I cannot wait for the presidential debates. And the problem with the Hillary email question is it's become so mind-numbingly boring. I mean, I actually think there's merits to asking her about it. There was definitely a threat to national security, what was going on, and there was definitely carelessness going on. But I think the problem is most of the public is getting bored of it and tunes out, and that's what you saw during that Matt Lauer town hall. I think one of the Hillary camp's real Achilles heels, though, is that they immediately, when faced with something like that, which didn't go so well for her, they start talking about sexism in the press. They start talking about how the press is biased against them, and I really don't think that's a great way for her to go. I mean, this week alone, there were 3 articles talking about how, the only reason you couldn't like Hillary Clinton is because of sexism, and I think we all know that that's a little over the top.
Well, I think, there's something to be said about, at least providing answers that people can understand. She didn't do a press conference for like 200 days and recently finally was able to get that out there, but it seems like it does continue and continue and continue. It's
I'm looking forward to the debate too, but I think it will be different than sort of a town hall type format when you have the two candidates there together. That we haven't seen that where they're really going at it with each other, and for them to connect with each other and have contact like that and really go at it, I think is going to be a lot different. And Trump's, let's face it, he's extremely entertaining. I mean, break out the popcorn.
It's going to be wild. I think it's going to be unlike anything voters have seen before.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the only way it could get wilder is, wouldn't it be amazing if they did it without a moderator, right? I mean, that would be absolutely spectacular television. I'm surprised no one's thought of it. Who knows? Maybe they'll roll out a fourth one, mano y mano, or mono y woman, as it would be for the fourth debate.
I would attend that.
Me too. What's the topic you think needs to be addressed that really hasn't been talked about so far?
I think that the issues are appropriate. I mean, like on the immigration issue, for example, the problem that I have with it is that it's all so superficial. We keep talking about, is he softening, is he not softening? I mean, how about asking people, we talk about the lawlessness on the border. How about the lawlessness in the workplace? Why don't we talk about the people that are employing undocumented immigrants? Or, why don't we delve into that issue a little more? What are people's plans on that? What is Hillary Clinton's plan on that? Really press her on what some of her policy prescriptions are. I think that this always happens, and I've done a lot of superficial coverage myself, but I do long for a little bit more substance in some of these issues that we're already talking about.
No, I agree. What's the issue for you that you haven't seen?
Well, in the debates in general, I just really like to see more follow-up questions. I think there's been an interesting pattern in this election with both Hillary and Donald Trump where you'll get asked a question about immigration. The answer will be something absurd or evasive or contradictory of something they've said 5 minutes ago, and then the interlocutor's like, okie dokie, moving on, and I think you see this again and again. So I'd actually like to see some doubling down. What do you mean by that? How do you contrast this with what you said last month? I think that's been a real hole in these forums and these town halls, and I hope it doesn't happen in the debates.
And I think with having two candidates instead of having, the show that we had during the primaries where there was more, Republican candidates, it'll be good to have it winnowed down like that. So hopefully there will be more substance. And, I do think that the moderators that they picked are, good. I mean, look, I hate to dump on a fellow journalist, but Lauer really did blow it a few times. I looked at that and thought, God, I hope I don't do that. That's not the follow-up type stuff. So
I guess the real question, though, is will there be time for follow-up questions? Because I imagine there's not going to be a lot of getting a word in edgewise, right? Thanks for both of you for joining us. I appreciate it. All right, ahead on State of Texas, the feds launch a new complaint about the Texas voter ID law. Why they say the state is not following a federal ruling aimed to get more people to the polls. And a new sign of tension between the state's U.S. senators. Why they are not doing each other any favors out on the campaign trail. While the presidential race took most of the headlines last week, one senator's comments has some Texans looking ahead to 2018. John Cornyn told CNN that he would not endorse fellow Texas Republican Ted Cruz in his re-election bid. Cornyn said he is not going to get involved in any primary races. Cornyn had previously criticized Cruz for making a speech at the GOP convention when he had no intention of endorsing Donald Trump. Cruz pulled a similar move back in 2014 when he refused to endorse Cornyn in his primary. No one has yet announced that they will challenge Cruz in 2018. Federal regulators say the state of Texas is misleading people about the state's voter ID law. The state loosened restrictions after a federal judge ruled the Texas law discriminated against minorities and low-income voters. The judge ordered Texas to spend $2.5 million to get the word to voters that they can still vote even if they don't have a photo ID. Now, in a legal filing, the Department of Justice said the state is giving misleading information, which implies that voters still need a photo ID. The filing also claims the state is spending limited funds in ways that don't reach voters affected by the ruling. One example cited by critics is the first stop in the state's voter outreach program. Secretary of State Carlos Cascos took the message to students at the University of Texas. Critics say that students are more likely to have an approved photo ID or access to get one than many other Texans affected by the federal order. Under the old Texas law, voters had to show one of 7 types of photo ID, such as a driver's license or a passport. The new law gives people another option if they don't have those IDs. Instead, you sign an affidavit along with either a paycheck, utility bill, or other government document that has your name on it. Smaller is better. That's what education leaders say when it comes to pre-kindergarten class sizes. But they have a big obstacle to reach that goal.
This textbook is a complete disaster.
A battle over a book. Why some in the state want to keep one textbook out of Texas classrooms. A textbook on Mexican-American history being considered for Texas students will draw more controversy this week. Last Tuesday, a committee of scholars convened by the Texas State Board of Education member Ruben Cortez released a scathing criticism of the book. The book has been the subject of debate since samples of the instruction material being considered by the state were released earlier this year. Cortez says the book includes passages portraying Mexicans as lazy and as criminals.
The fact that anybody actually thinks that and puts it in a book and wants to teach it to our Texas children, it's wrong. I don't understand what these people are thinking, or what kind of distorted reality that they live in, or why they think it's okay to teach racism to our kids.
The textbook, called Mexican American Heritage, is published by Momentum Instruction. The Texas State Board of Education will hold a public hearing on the textbook this Tuesday. The board is expected to vote to reject or adopt the textbook in November. A new state report is focusing on pre-kindergarten class size, saying the smaller, the better. The study from the Texas Education Agency is recommending limiting class sizes to 22 students, and student-to-teacher ratios should not exceed 11:1. But setting limits in Texas won't be easy. Austin ISD does not fit that ratio when it comes to 4-year-olds, but it works for pre-K 3-year-olds. And unless the state grants more funding for a longer period of time, the district foots the bill for an extra teacher in the classroom.
And a teacher assistant with benefits probably makes about $35,000. So if you multiply that by our 200 classrooms, that could be a heavy lift.
AISD says they are fully staffed for the children enrolled in pre-K classes right now, but there are more children coming every day. As the district continues to encourage parents to enroll, they will add teachers as the school year continues. The obstacle to improve student-teacher ratios in Texas is teacher pay. A survey from the Texas State Teachers Association found that nearly a third of teachers hold outside jobs during the school year. Teachers also report spending more than $650 out of their own pockets each year for classroom supplies. Political reporter Phil Prazen spoke with the TSTA president and an Austin teacher for perspective.
And here to put some of those numbers in perspective, we have Noelle Candelaria from the Texas State Teachers Association and Megan Buchanan, who is a choir teacher at Eastside Memorial High School at Johnson campus. Thanks for joining us today, both of you.
Great.
We'll start with you, Megan. Tell us a little bit about your story. Where did you go to school? Where do you teach? I understand you have several jobs now.
I went to college at University of Oregon and came down here with my ex-wife and started teaching middle school in Round Rock, and then eventually moved to Austin ISD at Eastside Memorial High School. And a year and a half ago, we got a divorce, and that's when I started looking for other employment or additional employment, because being a single mom, even part-time, and having an additional, like all the extra bills that came with the divorce, just made it really tough on a teacher salary. So.
So how many extra hours do you put in every week? What other jobs do you have?
I do health and fitness coaching with Beachbody, and I usually spend 10 to 15 hours a week doing that. And then I would driving for various rideshare companies, and I would do that for at least one full night out of the week.
What do you think about when you have to do those extra jobs? Here you are, you have an education, you have 12 years experience, and here you are, pulling the night shift at other jobs. How frustrating is that?
Well, the Beachbody stuff, at least I'm getting healthy, that's okay. But I just remember when I'm sitting there waiting for people to get in my car, I'm like, I could be doing so many things with this time and planning lessons, and I used to go to school board meetings and be really active in the community, and I've had to sacrifice a lot of that time. And so I feel a lot of resentment.
And so, Noelle, when you hear, some of these stories, is this acceptable from your guys' perspective?
Well, obviously what the legislature has not done to fund our schools is unacceptable. I think, Megan's story shows the dedication that our teachers have across the entire state of Texas. And unfortunately, we wish the legislature would share that same level of dedication, to truly fund our schools adequately so that our districts, could provide, a decent living for, Megan, but how many single moms do we have? I mean, if you look at our study, the vast majority of those that are working second jobs, they're the major breadwinners in their household. And so, this is an issue that, is impacting, Megan and her family, and impacting families all across the state of Texas, where teachers are dedicating, their professional lives to other people's children, sometimes, suffering that suffrage of their own children at times, because it's time that she's not only spending, not preparing for her lessons, but it's quality time that she's also missing out on her own children, having to work a second job. And, when you look at someone that's prepared themselves professionally to go to college and come and dedicate their professional lives to children, it's a lot to ask of them. And so it truly shows the dedication that Megan has, and thousands of teachers across the state have.
Now, when we get to legislative session here coming up in January, what would you like to see? Where specifically does the money come from? Are we talking about making the basic allotment bigger, or adjusting the cost of education index, which is more like the cost of living index? So living in Austin, it hits you guys harder than it does in the smaller rural areas. What would you advise as a specific change?
Well, I think we really need to look at how we tax in Texas, because there's obviously revenue that Texas can generate. We have the 5th largest economy in the world, right? And there is no excuse why in the 5th largest economy we are ranked 38th in per student funding, nationally. We're $2,000 on average behind in funding per student. I think that should be unacceptable to every parent and everyone in this community, because funding of our children's education is critical and key to the success of the future of the state.
Well, Megan, thanks so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
You may remember earlier this year, the state Supreme Court ruled against school districts that sued the state, claiming the Texas system for funding education was unconstitutional. A game of chance or a game of skill? One Texas lawmaker looks to clarify the rules for fantasy sports in the state, how it could let more people play for money. The fight over fantasy sports will likely make its way to the state capitol next session. You may remember Attorney General Ken Paxton issued a non-binding opinion back in January that some popular fantasy sports amounted to illegal gambling. He focused on sites like FanDuel and DraftKings, saying those sites take a cut of the money, which Paxton says is against state law. But a lawmaker from Laredo plans to challenge that opinion. Democrat Richard Pena Raymond announced he'll file legislation to declare fantasy football a game of skill, not a game of chance. There will be a lot of activity in the week ahead at the Capitol as lawmakers prepare for the upcoming session. On Tuesday, the House Committees of Defense and Veterans Affairs and Higher Education will jointly hear testimonies on the Hazelwood Act, which provides college tuition help to veterans. They'll look closer at eligibility requirements and future benefits of the program. Then on Wednesday, the Senate Transportation Committee will receive revenue updates from TxDOT. They'll also make recommendations on eliminating toll roads, removing eminent domain authority from toll corporations. Also on Wednesday, the Senate Committee of Education will take a look at school choice programs in other states. They'll also look at the state's procedures for intervening in schools with unsuccessful ratings. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. Stay tuned for Meet the Press coming up at 9. I'm Josh Hinkle. Have a great day.